when I'm talking about knowledge-rich tutoring, I'm talking about putting sort of content and knowledge at the centre of that tutoring experience rather than focusing on those big generic skills. It's a bit more explicit for students when they can get to the end of a tutoring session and they can say, oh, I know something that I didn't know at the start of this hour. For most people, there's nothing fascinating about paragraph structure. But most people can find something interesting about, a piece of literature or some history if you present it in the right way. One of the things I've always found challenging with teaching is recognising that the things that I find fun and the things that I find interesting are not interesting to your average 14-year-old. And so making that transition has always been a bit of a struggle. But I think, often we can arrive at some common ground with a nice bloody bit of history or something like that.
Hello and welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast, the podcast that brings you the latest in the world of tutoring, edtech and education, and hopefully inspires in you the big change that each and every one of us is capable of. Qualified Tutor is an industry-leading tutor training organisation and online tutoring community for thousands of tutors around the world. This podcast is the voice of this community, where we aim to hear from tutors, teachers, entrepreneurs, coaches, business experts, students, tutorpreneurs, and more from the world of tutoring about what inspires them every day, how they can help tutors like you, and what they've learnt about tutoring along the way. The question is, what will you learn today? Welcome to this episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. My name is Ludo Miller, your host, and today we are welcoming on a guest all the way from New Zealand. That guest is Lizzie Grace. So welcome, Lizzie.
Hi, Ludo. Nice to be here.
Wonderful. Yeah, so Lizzie is an English tutor and is the founder of Scholars Atelier. Now, Lizzie pushes the bar for students with academic struggles and for those in her community. And we love that. We love community and we love challenging your students. With a background as an English teacher in a high school, Lizzie, as self-proclaimed, quickly became tired of the system and the way in which it kind of drags down students, in particular those who need help the most. So Scholars Atelier provides the tools for students to truly learn, to gain knowledge. Lizzie espouses a knowledge-rich tutoring approach, and I can't wait to learn more about this today to become knowledge-rich, as it were. Now, in an earlier email exchange, Lizzie wrote that when we talk about tutoring, people often talk about the skills we're helping students to learn. And yet, for Lizzie, students make more progress and, crucially, enjoy their learning more when they get to consolidate these skills by putting them into practice, what we might call acquiring knowledge. So let's all learn something new today. Let's all acquire some new knowledge today. Lizzie, thank you so much for coming on. I think we're going to dive into our first question to really get to know you a little bit more. And that question is, what is your why as a tutor?
Yeah, okay. So I sort of, I guess I was kind of always being set up to become a teacher, I think. I remember in primary school, I was setting myself homework and then I'd do the homework and then I would get a different colour pen and mark the homework and give myself feedback and, my best linked up writing and all of that. So it was kind of always on the cards that I was going to be doing something in education. Sort of from that, I guess it's grown into I think it's really important that we live in a society that's filled with people who are interested in the world and who know something about the world and who can sort of engage with the world and engage with what's happening in it. And particularly through the written word, through written language. Yeah, and then sort of the other side of that is, I really like doing that work because I find the world really interesting, and this is a job where I can carry on learning about it and learning new things and sharing it with my students.
Well, first of all, I'd love to be one of your students, Lizzie, if that's how you approach it. It's just about learning, kind of encouraging an interest, a curiosity about the world through your tutoring, through your teaching. That's such a, first of all, such a worldly approach to improving a student's understanding of who they are and their place in the world and what they know about the world. Now, the motto of Scholars at Atelier, your company, your business, is read carefully, write clearly, think deeply. Can you go into this a bit further? What does this mean? Where did it come from?
It was sort of actually just a placeholder at first. I think I had to enter a tagline on something that I was signing up for, somewhere where I was listing my services or something, and sort of had to come up with something on the spot and kind of stuck with it from there. But really, sort of the idea that it came from was what I kept finding myself thinking as an English teacher in the classroom to start with, about really what I think we should be aiming for our students to do, in English in particular, but also really as sort of one of the main points of schooling and of education, is that I want every student to be able to read a text and understand it really well, not just understanding sort of the gist or roughly what it's about, but really getting the detail and understanding what the author is trying to say. And then once you've got that understanding from reading a text, you want to think really carefully or really deeply about that text. And you want to be able to form your own opinion and look at all of the different sides, think about how it relates to other things that you've read and other things that you know. And then you want to be able to express those ideas and those opinions, particularly for me, through writing, because that, of course, is how you can communicate with a really, really wide range of people. And then, of course, you're also participating in that cycle, because then people can read what you've written and they can think about that, and then they can write about what you've written, and so on. So I guess from that perspective, I think sometimes it made more sense to have the think deeply portion in the middle of that motto. But at the same time, I think it's sort of the thinking it's the most abstract one. So that's kind of why I put it near the end. And also because the thinking sort of infuses the whole process. Good thinking is good reading and good writing, and good reading and writing leads to good thinking. So they all feed into one another.
Yeah, okay. Now, I'm going to ask you the trickiest question of today. Which one is your most important out of those three?
Oh, that is a tricky question. I don't really think that you can separate them out. Like, I think you can't read well without thinking, and you can't write well without thinking. I guess if I had to choose between reading and writing, I guess I'd go with reading. But, you can always, I guess if you can't write well, you can go on a podcast instead.
Okay, I won't tell writing you said that, I promise.
I don't know. You need all three.
That's the most important point then of that is that read, write, think in whichever order you do them are the basis for understanding yourself, understanding your craft, and helping others understand you. And therefore, as you say, I love that bit about if an individual is able to do those three, then they then pass on that cycle to someone else, and so on and so on and so on. And you can really see that kind of happening through, let's say, a classroom, can't you? For those of you who know the Love Tutoring Festival, you'll be delighted to hear that we're back. From Monday the 24th to Friday the 28th of January 2022, the Love Tutoring Festival will return, bigger and better than ever. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about,
you're in for a real treat. The most loved festival in tutoring, the Love Tutoring Festival, is a 5-day online celebration of all things tutoring. With some of the biggest names in tutoring, education and pedagogy, and hundreds of committed and motivated tutors from all 4 corners of the globe taking part, it really is the biggest party in tutoring. We will again be working on a freemium ticket model this year, with all events totally free, apart from our famous and ludicrously inexpensive CPD accredited workshops. You can find out more, including the confirmed speakers so far, how to grab your place, and key information on our wonderful sponsors at qualifiedtutor.org/lovetutoringfestival. Let's raise standards in tutoring together.
Now, something that you opened up with when you first contacted me was this idea of knowledge-rich tutoring, which is clearly something you're passionate about. You very much believe in. It's weaved in, throughout your entire website and your entire kind of persona online. So why is knowledge-rich tutoring so effective?
So like you've sort of already articulated, when I'm talking about knowledge-rich tutoring, I'm talking about putting sort of content and knowledge at the centre of that tutoring experience, rather than focusing on those big generic skills. So rather than saying, oh, I'm just helping you with your reading or I'm just helping you with your writing, we're finding out stuff about the world by reading about it and writing about it. There's quite a few reasons why I think that's really important. We've got lots of research, lots of evidence backing up the benefits of knowledge for learning and thinking, and for everything else that we want to be able to do at school. I think it's important to note also, like, that knowledge only really helps you do those things when it's actually in your head. The sort of the most common objection to this kind of teaching is, well, we've got Google, we've got Wikipedia. Why should we waste time filling students' heads up with facts when they can look them up? But you can't actually think about information that's only on the internet in front of you. In order to think about it, it has to actually be in your head. And so it makes background knowledge has a huge impact on reading comprehension. How much background information you have, how much you know about the topic, is one of the strongest predictors for how much you'll actually understand a given text, more than knowing particular strategies or anything like that. It's just, do you know other stuff about what you're reading about? And then on the sort of the flip side of that with writing, obviously when you're writing, you have to write about something. You have to have some content. And a lot of the time what I find is, students will come to me or parents will come to me saying that the trouble is, essay writing, knowing how to write an essay. And I sit down with the student and we work on that, and it becomes clear pretty quickly, how an essay is meant to be structured. They know that they need an introduction and a body and conclusions, and they know they need a topic sentence and that sort of thing. They know what an essay is supposed to look like. What they don't know is actually enough information to be able to say something interesting about what they're supposed to be writing an essay on. That's with reading, understanding what you read, really important there. Really, really important for being able to actually write about something interesting. And then just in sort of that more abstract sense of being able to think creatively or think critically. That's often what's sort of proposed as the alternative to teaching lots of knowledge. But a lot of that kind of thinking comes from making connections between the different things that you know, or combining different things that you know in different ways. So having a really strong base of knowledge is really important for that too.
So I'm interested, is this something that you talk about explicitly with your students, this knowledge-rich approach, or is this something that you kind of infuse subtly and gradually?
It's mostly infused. Sometimes it sort of comes up naturally. I've had a few, sometimes with students, sometimes with their parents. They'll sort of bring up, they feel like they're actually learning something, whereas they sometimes, obviously they are learning things in school as well, but I think it's a bit more explicit for students when they can get to the end of a tutoring session and they can say, oh, I know something that I didn't know at the start of this hour, rather than just, often I ask them what they're doing in school and it's sort of like, oh, we're reading some stuff. What are you reading about? What have you learned about? And it can get really caught up in that sort of skills-based thing. So sometimes I do end up discussing it a bit more explicitly with students if they're bringing that sort of thing up and sort of making those comments about, what they feel like they're learning. And other times with other students, it's a bit more just sort of in the background and feeding into my planning and things.
To join the growing number of qualified tutors, enrol now for the Level 3 Qualification for Tutors. This 8-week online facilitated course covers the roles and responsibilities involved in teaching and learning, with a particular focus on inclusion, assessment, and feedback. Upon completion, you'll be awarded a Level 3 in Education and Training from Ofqual recognised training provider Highfield Qualifications. You will also gain a Qualified Tutor Quality Mark, the independent quality mark for tutors. Whatever your starting point, a qualification for tutors has to be the next step. Enroll today at qualifiedtutor.org/training.
You've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I feel like as the basis of this conversation, I'd love to just explore this a little bit further. What is the true power that you've seen of this style of learning for students? What is it that it brings them in kind of at the end of such an approach?
I think there's a few things. Like what I said, sort of that sense of, having, that sense of progress, I think can be really good, particularly for students who've struggled with school in the past. I think it's easier to get to sort of a point of, okay, I've taught you something about ancient Mesopotamia or the French Revolution or Shakespeare or something, and you now know these facts that you didn't know before. Whereas those sort of skill-based improvements to, I'm a better reader now or I'm a better writer now, those take a lot of time and they can be quite hard for students to spot. So I think that sense of, just making that really obvious progress through seeing your knowledge build is really satisfying for students. And also, a lot of the time they find it really interesting, particularly, like with those examples I gave before. I tend to bring quite a lot of history stuff in because I know that students in New Zealand don't get taught a lot of history at the moment, although there's starting to be some little shifts in our curriculum around that. But yeah, I think that they find it really interesting because they're learning new stuff. And so that often gets them a bit more excited about everything. And that I find is a good balance for, the more skills-based reading and writing stuff because, for most people, there's nothing fascinating about paragraph structure. But most people can find something interesting about, a piece of literature or some history if you present it in the right way.
Yeah, I'd love to know from our listener base out there if there's anyone who really gets up in the morning for paragraph structure.
I kind of do. Yeah, that's been one of the things I've always found challenging with teaching is recognizing that the things that I find fun and the things that I find interesting are not interesting to your average 14-year-old, and so making that transition has always been a bit of a struggle. But I think often we can arrive at some common ground with a nice bloody bit of history or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's what makes tutors so good at their craft is that they are truly, genuinely a bit nerdy about the fine details and technicalities, but they also have the personability and the kind of the awareness to be able to respond to their students' kind of needs and interests. And if that means, as you say, talking about a horrible, gory battle scene or talking about scoring the winner on a football pitch or whatever it is, then we're able to kind of be flexible and adapt.
Mm-hmm.
But what we really want to do is just talk about determiners and conjunctions and beginning, middle, end, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I was going to ask what your top tips for effective tutoring in this area are, but that I think is maybe the biggest one is being flexible and responsive. Was there anything more you wanted to add on top tips?
Yeah, I guess sort of related to that and that flexibility. This is mostly advice to myself, I think. Knowing that you can't teach everything. It's really tempting, I think, when you're trying to do this sort of approach to tutoring, you want to be really comprehensive. You become so aware of all of the gaps in students' knowledge. And, if you're designing the curriculum for an entire school, then you can try and sort of figure out a lot of stuff that you want to teach them. But when you've got a student that you only see for an hour a week and you're probably only going to see them for a year or two most of the time, you really have to sort of pick and choose what stuff you think is important, and accept that you're not going to be able to give them this perfectly well-rounded knowledge about everything in the world. But from there, I think a lot of it is making sure that the knowledge you're teaching in a lesson is really central, and sort of going back to what we were talking about before, making sure that the students know that the knowledge itself is important. I think, often the students that I see, at least, it would vary depending on where you are and what your school system is like, but the students that I see, a lot of them, they're very used to sort of the text or the topic that you're reading about is just sort of there to practice the skills with. And so getting them to switch into, like, no, I don't just want you to prove that you can read. I actually want you to learn about this topic and find out about it and know more about the historical topic or the piece of literature that we're studying at the moment. And so getting them to sort of reframe the way they approach the text there can make a big difference. And then the other key thing, I think, is focusing on vocabulary is really, really good way to, particularly, if you're not already sort of primarily centering what you're teaching around knowledge, building vocabulary is a really good way of bringing that little bit of knowledge into every lesson, because really the vocabulary relating to a topic, it's not just a bunch of words, it's really those key concepts and those big ideas that you need to know to be able to understand whatever topic you're working on with a student.
Yeah, I think that's such a key part of my tutoring, certainly is understanding the key topics, understanding the kind of related vocabulary around that. It's certainly where I might start if I was introducing a new topic of writing was right, let's spend 5-10 minutes coming up with the best vocab we can around this topic, and if you run out of ideas, then I'll supplement that with some of my own suggestions. So giving them the chance to go first and then helping them by giving them a bit more of a rounded look at it. What an amazing insight into the way you teach, the way you tutor, Lizzie. I feel like, most people would only hear this approach if they were one of your paying students. So I feel very lucky to have heard all this just as the host of a podcast, without even committing time and money to your service, Lizzie. But I hope that by speaking about that a little bit, you've understood your own approach a little bit more. And those of you listening, I hope there are some really practical tips and tricks that you can implement in your own tutoring from today, and perhaps also help you think a little bit more widely, step back from your own approach and see if you can direct it towards more of a knowledge-rich style. But just before we finish here, Lizzie, I'd like to know a little bit more about Scholars Atelier, because we haven't talked too much about you as a business leader, as an entrepreneur. But what would success look like for your business in 5 years' time?
Yeah, that's a bit a tricky question, definitely. I'm sort of, I'm really just getting started. So really my main focus at the moment is just, I want to keep doing what I'm doing and get better at it for quite a bit longer, probably. I'd say my main goal, sort of related to that and going beyond that a bit, is building up my curriculum a bit more to be a bit more systematic. At the moment, that's sort of happening in rounds. I do cover similar topics with different students, but each time I'm adding a bit more into it and trying out different ways and adjusting exactly what activities I do with a given topic, depending on where my student's at in terms of skills. But sort of trying to get that to be a bit more systematic, and particularly getting more systematic around things like vocabulary is kind of the main thing that I'm working on, is building up that curriculum side of things. And I think that's sort of, I'm undecided about if I want to, eventually bring more tutors into the business or not. But I think having that curriculum is sort of the prerequisite to whatever I want to do with this next.
Okay, so it's curriculum focused. It's building out that framework of curriculum. Wonderful, amazing. Thank you so much, Lizzie. You can find out more about Lizzie at scholarsatelier.com, or you can find some of her resources on the famous teachers.payteachers.com site. Just type in Scholars Atelier there and you can find out more about Lizzie's resources and materials and short kind of presentations, courses, that kind of thing. Lizzie is an English tutor, is the founder of Scholars Atelier. Join us today to talk about knowledge-rich tutoring. If you want to re-listen to any of what she said, just drag the cursor back and listen to some of those amazing answers again. Lizzie, thank you very much. I have been Ludo Miller. I've been your host of the Qualified Tutor Podcast, and we will see you all again next time.
Now, just before we close today, I wanted to let you guys know about a new feedback and commenting feature we have made available to everyone and anyone. SpeakPipe is a website that allows anyone to record a short audio message and send it in. We have created a special Qualified Tutor Podcast SpeakPipe page, which can be found at speakpipe.com/Qualified Tutor Podcast or in the show notes below. The aim of this is to allow you to leave feedback on any part of our show, and really whenever it pops into your head. There's no limit to how much feedback you can give. Every week we'll be taking one piece of feedback and highlighting it here at the end of the episode. Thank you to Victoria Burns, founder of VB Tutoring, for kicking us off with the first ever audio feedback on the Qualified Tutor Podcast.
Good morning, everyone. This is Victoria from VB Tutoring. I'm here to ask the community to join Find the Right Tutor on Facebook. Lots of you have, and we are growing very, very quickly. You're also welcome to join my group, VB Tutoring. And also I'm here to say how much QT has really made an impact on me over the last 6 months, making lots of good friends and contacts, and it's lovely to not be a lone tutor. So big shout out to QT for all you do, and thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. Lovely to hear from you as ever. Remember that you can leave your own message at speakpipe.com/Qualified Tutor Podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. Whether you're a regular listener of this podcast or you've just stumbled across it, join the Qualified Tutor Podcast group within the Qualified Tutor community to stay up to date with our latest news, offers, workshops, and of course, simply to meet other tutors like you. Whatever your level as a tutor, our training courses will be the next step in your professional development. Visit qualifiedtutor.org/training to find out more about our CPD accredited and Ofqual recognised courses, the first of their kind in the tutoring industry. Your student deserves the best tutor possible. Make that happen today by joining Qualified Tutor